Hello and welcome everyone to the Children's Tumour Foundation, Navigating the Emotions of Living with NF, Grief and Loss. The reason we created this webinar today was we often, when speaking to people and they talk about just those feelings that they have, whether it's a new diagnosis or whether you've been living with the condition for 20 years. This webinar came about because I was talking to somebody who has been living with the condition for 20 years. And she said, I think I've just never dealt with those feelings. And that made me think of our wonderful host, Nathan MacArthur, Dr. Nathan MacArthur, who's joining us today and kindly agreed to do this presentation. I'll give you a little introduction to myself and my team, and then I'll hand it over to Nathan and we can get started. My name's Ruth Lindsay. I'm Head of Support at the Children's Tumour Foundation. As you all probably know, we support children, adults, families, and anybody connected to people with NF throughout Australia. We run NF Helpline, we run camps, community days, we host clinical symposiums, we have monthly online peer groups called NF Connect, and we have 40 plus resources. We speak to teachers, we speak to doctors. Actually, we speak to anybody who will listen. Our mission is really to create awareness of NF and to advocate for every person who's impacted, whether that be the person living with the condition, parents, carers, family, or general people in the community like teachers. So any questions you have at any time, please just give us a call. You can contact us on 02 9713 6111 anytime, or please email us at support@ctf.org.au. And if you have any issues or any feelings or just want to chat following on from today's discussion, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's exactly what we're here for. And the NF Helpline is really here for you and to talk about anything to do with NF. So thank you very much. On my team is Meredith Finelli and Terry Moore. They're also joined us today. And we're joined by our Auslan interpreter, Celeste. So thank you all for coming along. And now I'll hand over to Nathan to get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. My slide is not changing. Let me click that. There we go. So just a little bit about me. So for anyone that's trying to work out the accent, it's Scottish. I more often get Irish or Canadian than I do Scottish, but I can't do subtitles, but hopefully you can understand me, but let me know if you need me to repeat anything. I have a background in psychology and social work and have worked as a social worker in a range of hospitals and NGO settings with people experiencing both chronic illness and life-threatening illness. I now work in private practice where I see people experiencing grief in any of its forms, whether because of illness or bereavement. In putting together today's presentation, I'll be talking a bit about the impacts of grief, the different ways that grief can affect us. I'll be offering a couple of theories of grief just to help us put a bit of a framework around what this thing called grief is. But also, and hopefully most importantly, I'll be trying to offer some skills and strategies, some practical things that you can take away from today's webinar to put into practice that will hopefully help you to cope with some of the grief and the loss that you might be experiencing. A few things to consider. I guess in a 1 hour webinar like this, it can only be a sort of introduction and an overview of key ideas. And we're talking about sensitive topics. I just ask you to be mindful of that as you share any personal information, as you ask any questions in the chat today as well. Caveat is that this is general information. I don't know your particular circumstances or what you might be experiencing. And obviously, if I was meeting you for one-on-one counselling or something like that, I'd be tailoring this very specifically to your needs. So this is that overview, hopefully with some things that are applicable to you. If you've come here looking for that sort of magic wand solution, unfortunately, that isn't something that we have with grief. But alongside of that, I hope there are some strategies that are applicable to your circumstances. So with that, I'm going to jump in. I'm very guilty always of trying to overstuff these presentations. So I'm going to rattle through a few of these slides, but hopefully I kind of get into any detail. I would ask you to guide me. If there's more detail you want about anything, please flag that and ask those questions. So grief is, in my mind, really an umbrella term that we use to talk about the responses that we might have to losses of various types. I think we often think about grief in relation to death losses and a sort of bereavement experience, but I think it's absolutely applicable to non-death related losses too. And those might be losses related to a diagnosis like NF1. It can be losses related to progressions of a condition or new tumours. But it can also be the losses that sit alongside that particular sort of health impacts of that condition as well. So those losses that come about as changes within a family or a network and how we relate to one another. But it can also be changes to the ways that we live our life as well. So, for example, for parents needing to give up work or other parts of the things that they might have attended to become a carer, to attend medical appointments, to do the things that they might need to do in supporting their child as well. And so I think very much of grief as sort of the center of a whole constellation of different effects that we might have, which can include changes to our identity. When we get a particular diagnosis, that it might change how we think about ourselves and how we experience ourselves. It can be, as I mentioned before, those changes to relationships. It can be a loss of what we imagined our lives might be like, what the future might hold. And particularly, and I'm thinking of the parents that might be joining us for this conversation, there's sometimes a sort of a taboo or a hidden part to some of that loss. I think all the parents that I meet are very grateful for the child that they have and their unique specialness and all of that. But there is also that thought to what the future might have held if that child didn't have that particular condition and needs and what that might have looked like. And so a loss, a sense of grief related to that, that sometimes can't be expressed or acknowledged. Now, those practical things that actually having any child or living with a medical condition where we need medical assistance, there can be impacts on our income and finances and the out-of-pocket expenses that come with that, and the ways that we need to change or alter life in practical ways to cope with that as well. For anything that is life-changing, it can impact upon our faith, our spirituality, the way we make sense and meaning in the world and how we understand the world as well. For people providing care, I think it can also impact their health. I guess providing care or worrying about someone that we care deeply about can cause us a lot of stress, and that affects our own personal health too. Unfortunately, I've heard from so many people about that loss of support of people around them, that those people that they thought if they ever needed additional support would be around, whether that's family members or good friends, disappear, are not there, are not asking the questions they need or offering the empathy they need. And so there can be a loss alongside that as well. There can also be loss of trust, and I mean that sort of broadly in that spiritual sense about the world being a fair place, but also that trust, particularly in health and medical institutions. I know NF, like lots of conditions, can be one that is difficult to diagnose, and ones that can take a while to diagnose. And so that trickiness of having faith and trust in the medical fraternity to be doing everything in the way that we would want them to be doing as well. And I guess in having to, whether it's our children's health or our own health, put that in the hands of somebody else. There's a trickiness, a difficulty to that as well. So I want to turn now to think about all the different ways that we might respond to those different aspects of the grief we might be experiencing. I think mostly when we talk about grief, we think particularly of those emotional responses, and most often to sadness as the one that comes up most commonly. But here we have a list of some of the other things that I would see as common to experiences of grief. This is not to say that everybody will experience all of these things, but these might be some of the things that we go through in experiencing grief over time. There can be a helplessness or a hopelessness in the face of the changes that have occurred, and also an uncertainty and a concern for what the future might hold. For some of us, we express that fear in terms of anger and irritability, that unfairness of this thing having happened to me or to my family. We can have a longing or a yearning for what life would have been like without this condition, the life that we might have been leading if we have been dealt a different hand of cards by fate or whatever we believe the reasons for this happening. There can be guilt and regret, and I think particularly for parents I've worked with, that guilt around, even though they haven't in any deliberate way done this, that sense of having passed on genes that may have caused a condition, and that concern about that, and that often guilt that is carried across a lifetime about the impacts that unfold for a child as well. There can be a dread, that sort of fear of the future and that dread of other bad things happening, that we know when something difficult has happened to us, it makes it feel like it's far more likely that other difficult things might happen as well. For those of us that might become particularly overcome by that, the grief, that there can be a sense of not wanting to live, of not feeling like we can go on with the overwhelming emotions of this. And sometimes when emotions overwhelm us, we numb out. We actually have a sort of protective thing that our bodies, our minds do of almost not feeling anything, which can be troublesome and concerning as well. Alongside that, I think it's really important to acknowledge, and we don't often talk about those sort of mental responses to grief, those cognitive impacts of what it's like to be experiencing all of that emotion and the loss that we might be going through as well. I have lots of people that get concerned about being forgetful, a sort of short-term sort of memory loss of not being able to retain information or walking into the room and forgetting what they've come in for and doing that very often, more often than maybe they used to. That difficulty concentrating, difficulty following along with a conversation, but also difficulty making decisions. I have lots of people talk about this as sort of a mental fog, a sort of a kind of blurriness of brain function that makes it feel that their brain isn't firing in all the ways that they would want it to be firing. That can also involve a lot of worry and rumination, a sort of a concern about different challenges that might come up. And I'll talk a bit more in detail about that in a few slides' time. It can also be things around intrusive thoughts and memories and sort of the sort of more trauma related parts of grief and loss. Certainly for anybody living with a condition or any parent supporting a child with any sort of medical condition or health condition, being around a hospital environment is inherently traumatic. Having to have any sorts of treatments that you might have to have yourself or a family member, but also witnessing other people that are patients going through different things as well is something that people carry with them. And often that doesn't get the attention it deserves as well. But I think important to acknowledge that all of those things, I guess, that sort of loss of innocence that can come with entering a health environment and seeing all the difficult things that can befall human beings, there is something that people carry with them around that as well. For some, it can be a sort of denial or avoidance, a little bit like the numbness that we put away, kind of the difficult aspects of our grief or our experiences. For others, it can be intrusive in terms of dreams, which can be about sort of anxiously related things or other things that we might have witnessed as well. As if that wasn't enough, we also have the different physical responses that we might have. A really common part of grief and sort of seeing grief as really a stress response is that it might disturb our sleep. And that can be anything from difficulty falling asleep, to sleeping more, to waking in the night with our brains churning over and over again. We know stress really affects our gastrointestinal system, so it can lead to sort of a loss of appetite or an eating as a way of comforting, diarrhea, constipation, those really physical responses that we can have. As well, are other stress responses of our heart rate being a little more elevated, breathing a little more shallowly. So those sort of physical impacts as well. It's exhausting carrying any sort of loss and grief and all of the impacts that I'm talking about. That wears us down. That's a whole lot to be carrying. It can also lead to changes to our sexual drive as well. So again, one of those more taboo topics that we don't often talk about when we think about grief, but it can lead to a loss of interest in sex and connection in terms of intimacy, or a real need for that sort of sex and intimacy as a way of sort of soothing ourselves, of calming ourselves when we're feeling stressed. Lots of us might keep busy to distract ourselves from things. For other of us, it can be a lack of motivation when we're grieving intensely, when we're feeling that loss. Nothing seems to matter. And so, why would I bother? It can be about avoiding people, places, or situations, just kind of keeping ourselves to ourselves or avoiding things that might trigger that experience of grief. For others of us, we might do that sort of self-soothing thing through alcohol or other substances as a way of managing the impacts of this loss. For others, it can be that sort of nothing matters, or so indulging in more risky behaviors because of that. We also have the social aspects, and I think we could easily talk for a whole hour on this, but how people around us respond to what we're going through as well. So sometimes I often think about this as a little bit similar to when someone is pregnant and everybody kind of feels that they now have a right to touch the woman's belly. That sometimes when someone's going through something that's health related, that's a condition, that people seem to feel like they've got a right to ask any questions that they might want to, and what that means to actually fend off those questions, to keep that privacy for going into hospital or having different specialist appointments or different things that might happen, that sort of idea that we might want to keep some of that private. I think also commonly we have this idea of unhelpful help. So those well-intentioned people around us that think they know what's best for us and make those suggestions often in unsolicited ways that can sometimes be offensive, or at the least just not helpful. There can be stigma and judgments about different health conditions as well, and sort of that idea of what caused it, and sort of the myths that we can have about certain things as well. I've talked a little bit about that loss of support and social withdrawal. But I think also important that sense of isolation. If we are living with a particular medical condition or caring for someone, there's often a sense that other people don't get that. They don't understand what it's like to walk in your shoes. And so that can feel like quite a lonely place as well. When something happens to us, that we can also lead to that questioning of meaning and purpose in life, of what's it all about, if we can be dealt this sort of difficult hand to manage in life as well. For some people, it might be a crisis of beliefs that makes them doubt about whatever spiritual or religious faith that they had, or there's a sense of comfort in that as well. And for others, it can be a sense of post-traumatic growth, that actually through going through hardships, difficult things in life, changes and griefs that accompany them, that it can help us to decide what to prioritize in our lives. It can help us to have more empathy for other people going through difficult times as well. So there might be ways that we grow or develop or learn things that actually we quite value. We think about one of the positive things to come out of experiences of grief. So I want to touch now just a little bit on the theories. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of the sort of better known ones and some of the lesser well-known ones. I think when we're talking about grief, we can't quite get past Kubler-Ross, even though in many ways I would like us to be able to. But a lot of people have this idea that, yeah, if we're grieving, we should go through these stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, and pop out the other side. Now, Kubler-Ross's stages of grief is really a debunked theory. We know it isn't as linear or as neat as that, and Kubler-Ross herself did not intend it to be. As she says herself, the stages of grief were never meant to tuck messy emotions into neat packages. They are responses to loss that many people have, but there's not a typical response to loss, as there is no typical loss. Our grief is as individual as our lives, which I think speaks to how this can be different for all of us. But I think particularly living with the fluctuations of a health condition, that grief can come upon us in different ways at different times in our lives. And that sense of loss can look differently at different times in our lives. And so this neat sort of idea of stages doesn't really attach to that sort of messiness of how this might be across the ups and downs of our health. Some of the theories that I think are maybe more useful with this sort of arena are this idea of Shatter's assumptions. Now, the idea here is that we have these assumptions, we're brought up to have these assumptions about life, that the world is a predictable and fair place, and that as long as we eat our greens, we exercise, we treat our neighbours as we would like to be treated ourselves, then good things will happen to us. We will have a long and healthy life without too many troubles or challenges, and we will die gently in our sleep, aged at about 102. I think when we get a diagnosis of ourselves or someone in our family, it turns all of that upside down. And that sort of really can blow up our idea of the predictability of the world and make the world feel like a more dangerous or a less fair place. So it can make us aware of our own sort of vulnerability, and can make us see the world in a sort of different way. There's sort of a loss of innocence sometimes that comes with that changes our understanding of the way that the world operates. The other theory that I think is particularly helpful, and maybe helpful to people living with NF, is this idea of chronic sorrow. So that idea that there is a periodic recurrence of sadness or other grief-related feelings that are associated with significant non-death related loss, the losses that can accompany the fluctuations of health and illness. It's something that's really not recognized, I think, by a lot of people around the person experiencing that loss, because there aren't the rituals, there aren't the sort of symbols of that we have with certain sorts of losses, like a death-related loss, things like funerals that really acknowledge that profound change that has happened. But with the diagnosis of a condition or the different fluctuations with a condition that can mean losses, for example, of hearing that come with a development of a condition, that those are not sort of singled out as worthy of acknowledgement. And we might not acknowledge those ourselves, and certainly the people around us might not be really recognizing those for the impacts that they might have. Another theory that I find useful in my work is thinking about the different styles of coping and grieving that people might have. This talks about a continuum of how we might cope or respond to grief, with intuitive grievers on one end and instrumental grievers on the other. Intuitive grievers are more emotion focused. There are people that are able to more easily identify the emotions that they're experiencing, often find it helpful to talk about those emotions that they might share with friends, or might be more likely to access support, like the support that the foundation provides, or counselling supports as well. That's that sort of helpfulness of being able to talk things through and feel kind of unburdened in being able to speak about things. At the other end of that continuum are instrumental grievers. Those are people that are a bit more up in their heads, problem solving. Those people that might be happier with a checklist of things to do and are less likely to accept a kind of both formal and informal supports as well. Now, with any continuum in life, we know that often we might sit at different parts of this continuum with different challenges or at different times in our life. So we have this idea of a blended coping style with grief as well, that some of these things might be true for different of us in different situations. I might pause there just to check if there's any questions about any of that before I move on. I've got something.
I think we did have something.
Yeah. Social. So I'm just going to read this out for everyone. Yeah. So
thank you, Nathan.
yeah. So I've had parents stop their children from playing with my child after I've discussed their condition. I saw them at the hospital and explained my child's condition, and they then stopped their child from attending my child's birthday and wouldn't respond to messages, etc. Another person said, "Oh, I just thank God every day my family doesn't have to go through anything like that." When I tried to explain how serious the situation was to a family member, they said, "Oh, I've asked another family member, and they said if they haven't had a PET scan, your child's condition mustn't be serious," and just totally making assumptions that because they understood metastatic cancer, they understood my child. Very sad how people can be very much, very sad how people can be very much a loss of innocence as to the true nature of the world. Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that yeah, I guess I'm sorry that that's been your experience, but it certainly speaks to a lot of what I hear people going through, of that people thinking they know and really not knowing, and that sort of thing of almost, and I think it goes not necessarily only to a sort of that misunderstanding about whether a health condition is contagious, but there's something about sadness being contagious or hardship being contagious, and that bit of avoiding that because we don't want to think about that sort of stuff. You mentioned cancer there, so it's just popped up in my head that memory of, I used to work at the Children's Hospital at Westmead with parents whose child had been diagnosed with cancer, and they would often say at McDonald's they would donate to the cancer charity Ronald McDonald House, and would never think that could possibly happen to their child. And then when it does, there's kind of that loss of innocence that comes with that. We move into a different category and see the world in a different way. And I think that's true for most of us. We kind of like to keep that delusion almost that bad things happen to other people or difficult things happen to other people, and we're somehow immune from that. Thank you for that comment. Yes.
Can I just add, we also have resources that can help with that. So we have these little cards that you can, if you don't feel like talking about NF, they're little information cards. They're just a little business-sized card, and they're sort of designed to allow you to explain NF to other people. So I think in those kind of incidences, it could be helpful, if somebody says, oh, well, it's not that serious, the PET scan, the this, the that, if you could even hand them the card and just say, all right, this is some information, or you don't even have to say that. You could just hand them the card. It takes the little QR code that takes them straight to a page of information. And they were designed sort of specifically for that purpose, because even once you've explained it, sometimes people still don't get it. But what we've found with these little cards, it sort of gives it's a real thing, and this is a little bit about what I'm dealing with. So I think it just helps people understand a little bit more about NF. And I think that awareness can help create to lessen these sort of incidents and things. And the tricky thing about NF is the lack of awareness creates confusion and things like that. So,
and it also helps with the explanations of NF, that we know NF is a very difficult thing to talk about, and particularly if you're having to go through it repeatedly with just about every person you meet. These cards are very good to be able to alleviate that burden. And I have to say, just hot off the press as of yesterday, we also have a QR code that can explain schwannomatosis as well. So if we have anybody in the audience now or watching this in the future, please contact us, as we have a newly developed one for schwannomatosis. There's a couple of other comments, Nathan, before we move on.
Yes, so there's something about denial or avoidance for someone living with NF themselves. So we'd really, just want to comment on that as certainly a part of grief and loss. And I think we stigmatize sometimes denial or avoidance as something we shouldn't be doing, that's a sort of bad thing. I see it very much as sometimes a bit of denial and avoidance is necessary. We can't be in the midst of the really difficult challenges of this, I guess the realities of this all of the time, that sometimes can be quite a disabling thing if we let ourselves feel all of the emotions of grief or change all of the time, that can mean we're not able to function at work or in our relationships. So sometimes quite deliberately placing that to one side can be a useful thing, but also allowing ourselves at different times to feel that, to be aware of that too. I think that was all. Was there another comment, Meredith, you wanted to?
In the Q&A, it was, I think, reiterating that the people didn't want to expose their child to the person's child's pain, and some people don't want to understand, and it's easier to just be sort of blissfully ignorant and unaware.
So I want to move now in this sort of second half of the presentation to offer a few hopefully helpful ideas and strategies about coping with change and grief. One of the things that I'm really conscious of is about the impacts of living with uncertainty and what that means, and what that can be like. And one of the ways that that can impact upon us, that can be uncertainty, whether it's for ourselves or for a family member or others that we care about, can be very much that uncertainty or that concern about new health challenges or an exacerbation of already existing health challenges as well. I think one of the things that we often do is go to the worst case scenarios. That's sort of part of what the human brain seems to do, particularly at 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, that we do that fearing the worst of the most awful things that might happen or the most challenging things that might occur. I think there's also something now. I have a gentleman I'm working with that talks about he's forever time traveling about his particular condition, that he's grieving for the now and the changes now, but also kind of transporting himself into the future and lots of different alternate futures of what how his condition might be in the years to come and what that might mean, what the health impacts or the physical impacts of that might be for him. So I think that's something we do in trying to sort of manage uncertainty, is we try and predict and think what might happen. And that for a lot of people really emerges as a sort of form of worry, a worry about the future. And when I think about why we worry, and I'm happy for people to comment if they've got other perspectives on this, but I think part of why we worry is a sort of trying to reassure ourselves that we will cope with whatever the future might hold for us. It's sort of a planning, a preparation for various different eventualities to allow us to be confident in what the future might hold and our own kind of resources in being able to deal with that future. Now, I want to offer a couple of thoughts about how we might address that. So, and this is not saying that this is the right way to think about it, but I think I find it a helpful quote when thinking about the worries that I sit with, is this quote from Marcus Aurelius, the Roman philosopher, Stoic philosopher, who said, "Never let the future disturb you. You will meet it, if you have to, with the same weapons of reason which today arm you against the present." I think that's a sort of lovely way of saying that, recognizing that often when we're worrying about things in the future, we need to remember that we've managed to deal with everything up until now, that all our sort of skills and experiences and our strength and our resilience have allowed us to navigate all of the challenges we might have experienced in life before now. And so maybe there's no reason to doubt that we'll be able to cope with whatever the next challenge is over the horizon. So a bit of reassuring of ourselves that actually we are people that cope. We are people that navigate these challenges, and somehow we get through it every time. I think there's also something about being a little discerning or selective in our worries and when we choose to worry about particular things. So I use this strategy of worry postponement, which I think can be useful with certain sorts of worries. This isn't for all worries, but for some sorts of worries. And it's about identifying a sort of core question or concern. So often that can be in a realm of health, is what will I do if kind of the next assessment that I have with the specialist shows that something has gotten worse or there's something else that I might need to deal with. And there's then that question about, do I or can I action or solve this now? And often the answer is no, there is actually nothing that I can do about this just now, because I don't know until I've got the medical information about what that is or what the options might be or how I might deal with that. So I talk with people about choosing a future date to consider this further. So almost putting a circle in the calendar, a note in the diary, that this is the date after that particular medical assessment or appointment or whatever it is that's on the horizon. I'm going to worry about that once I have the information to actually worry about it. So it's a way of kind of attending to the worry. We're not ignoring it or avoiding it. We're saying this is a legitimate and an important worry to have, but it's not a worry I can do anything about right now in this moment. So I'm going to schedule it for a future time. Now, that might not always be the case. So we might have lots of now real-time worries, and we might have a whole checklist, a whole menu of those things that might be occupying us and that we might be ruminating a lot about in terms of trying to plan that for the future. This idea of worry time is a way of acknowledging that there can be something helpful in worrying. We might need to do that some of the time as a way of problem solving about those worries, but we don't need to do it all day, all of the time. So this involves setting a time every day, or maybe a few times a week, or maybe just once a week, where we're going to schedule the time to do the worrying. As worries come up, we add them to our to-do list of worries. So we know they're there for safekeeping. We're not going to forget about them, but it's a way of putting them to one side as they pop up in our head. We have that time, so say it's 1 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon is my worry time. Well, my alarm goes off and I start my worry time. And I have a timer, usually for no more than 15 or 20 minutes. And at that time, I go through these list of worries and try and problem solve and allow myself to fully kind of jump into all of the worries of that. And then when the alarm goes off to say my 15 or 20 minutes is up, I cross anything off the list that I feel that I've solved, and anything else that needs to be worried about again carries across, and I do something else to change my mood or distract me. Play some music, go for a walk, catch up with a friend, whatever it is, until the next worry time. So it's a way again of containing those worries so that they don't leak out everywhere, but also meaning that we're doing something with them. So we're not just pushing against the worry without actually attending to it. We're being just conscious about what parts of our lives we will allow it to take up. So I hope there's something useful for that. Let me know if you have any questions about those strategies. I also wanted to think a little bit about managing relationships, particularly within families. So I know we had a comment before about friends and other people, but I'm going to think just for a moment about within our families, within our family or couple relationships, about how we might manage the impacts of grief and change and uncertainty. I think first is to acknowledge that different members of a family will cope with that grief differently. We have those different grieving styles that I was talking about before. So some people might want to talk about emotion, and some might be really practical problem solvers. I like, particularly in couples, to point out that that doesn't mean that someone isn't feeling all the feelings associated with this, that actually they just might be expressing and coping with them differently. That also has sort of social and cultural factors. We might express or think about our emotions and grief differently because of our gender, our cultural or our religious background or expectations as well. So to acknowledge that people do this differently, even within kind of our closest relationships. I think also acknowledging that we can have in the same ways that we might disagree about how to parent a child, we might disagree about how to manage money, we might disagree about how to manage sort of grief and loss and change as well. So there can be different approaches to how we navigate these health challenges and what we do with them. And also with that comes differentness in communication styles that in any relationship in any time can be tricky. That's part of being human, is it's difficult to know and communicate and understand each other. But we also have those different styles of people that like to talk through things and people that are more private problem solvers. And I see that creating differences in relationships too. What we know when a relationship is put under pressure because of health challenges, that it can destabilize a relationship, but mostly that's only highlighting if there are already existing difficulties. We also know it can absolutely strengthen relationships. So I also don't want to buy into the myth that problems always make problems in relationships, that sometimes it can be a time where we really get better at communicating, at becoming a team to solve different problems. I think it's also important to notice that our family relationships are set within networks of other relationships. So parents are a sort of subsystem, kids are another subsystem. Your relationship with one child is one relationship, a relationship with another child is a different one, and all of those different connections interact differently with us. And we might find it easier to interact with some people as opposed to others, often because we're a bit more alike with them in the way that we see the world. I also think it's important to recognize within families and couple relationships that when we're feeling those impacts of grief and loss, that just lessens our ability to be emotionally available to others in our family. So when a family is under stress, when a family is experiencing loss, everybody has more needs at the same time when everybody has less capacity to meet those needs. So there's kind of a deficit. We're sort of emotionally overdrawn in a way, and we might need to be more generous around that. So what can we do about all of this? I think a few things that are sort of key in my mind are about how we hone our communication skills. I think one of the things, and I often see this, particularly in parents caring for a child with a health condition, that making time for communication can be really important. That it isn't something that we necessarily need to talk all the time about, that it isn't colonizing happy family time or just relaxing family time, that actually maybe we schedule some time every week to talk about what appointments we have coming up, how we feel we're managing, what other challenges that there might be in the calendar for the next month, and problem solve those things, a little bit like the worry time. We need to practice our active listening skills. So being able to really hear what another person is saying, and a bit of that's that testing assumptions bit as well. Knowing that we're not always right, that somebody else's perspective might have something to offer, and we need to check out what their perspective is and make sure that we're understanding that. And also offering some empathy in that space as well, really trying to understand that we might be in a relatively good space with this right now, but someone else is really feeling the sorrow, the sadness, the difficulty of what's going on in the family. Compromise, and obviously this is true for all sorts of things, so that room for different grieving styles and different grieving needs. We might have one person in the family that needs to talk about this a lot, and another person that feels exhausted by talking about this. So what are the compromises? Can we make that regular time to connect on this subject so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, but there's still space for it? And obviously, counselling can be a space to do that, a safe space to explore particular challenges and to be supported by someone that's a professional in the area to manage those communication skills and hone those communication skills. So for some families, that isn't always essential, but for some that can be helpful. And I think particularly with the cumulative challenges that might happen over time with the fluctuations in health and wellness too. Okay. Time is going fast, so I'm going to keep us moving along here. I wanted, just as a sort of final part of what I'm going to present on, to do a little exercise around managing the emotions that we might feel as part of our grief and loss as well. And those can be a whole range of things, whether that's guilt or anger or envy of other people living their sort of simpler or easier lives as we might perceive it. Any of these emotions, we might need some strategies to look after for ourselves. So what I wanted to do in this part is just to guide you through a particular exercise that I use a lot with my counselling clients, experiencing emotions that are really understandable responses to the grief and change that they're going through. So if you feel okay too, I'm going to ask you to join me in this visualization. I know obviously for the person that needs the Auslan interpreter, they might not be able to close their eyes because they need to see what the interpreter is saying. But for others, if you feel okay to close your eyes, I'm going to invite you to do that right now. I'm going to ask you just to notice any of the emotions that might have been stirred up by the things that I've been talking about, or any emotion that you might have been struggling with or finding challenging over the last few days. And I want you just to scan through your body, just to notice where in your body that emotion sits. So that might be in your throat, your heart, your chest, your stomach, just noticing whereabouts in your body you feel that emotion most strongly. And I want you to notice if that emotion has a center or a core. If it has edges that are well defined or if they're fuzzier. If that emotion sensation is still or if it has movement. If that emotion had a color, noticing what color it might be. And if it feels okay to, I want you to ask you to place a hand over that part of your body where you're feeling that emotion most strongly right now. Not to try and change it in any way, but just to help you to bring that attention to it even a bit more strongly. And And I want you to recognize this emotion, whatever it is, as a sort of pain or distress or suffering. And acknowledging these sorts of emotions as part of what makes us human, that all humans feel distress or suffering at different points in their lives. The source of that, the flavor of it, might vary greatly, but part of what makes us human, part of what connects us, is that we're able to feel feelings like these. And I want you to offer yourself a little kindness or compassion around this emotion that you're experiencing right now. If it feels okay to stroke your thumb or fingers, or to gently pat your hand, a sort of reassuring touch that looks after this emotion. It just acknowledges it and offers it some kindness. Again, if it feels comfortable to, I want you to offer yourself some words of kindness just in your own head, some words of compassion about this emotion. It might be something along the lines of, poor you, this is really hard right now. I can see you doing your best. And noticing how that feels. And just bringing your attention back to that emotion sensation in your body, just to notice if it's the same or if it's changed in any way. Acknowledging that for a moment. And then bringing your attention to your breath. Slow breath in. And gently out. Feeling the sensation of your feet against the floor and the air against your skin. And gently, when you're ready, opening your eyes and coming back to the presentation. Okay. That's the last part of the formal presentation that I had, but I know we've got a few minutes for questions if anyone wants to clarify or ask anything about things that I haven't covered.
There is a question from Claire. How do you know if your child would benefit from counselling to help process their own grief from the diagnosis?
Yeah, good question. So I think there's a couple of things there that I would acknowledge. One, sort of depending a little bit on the age and stage of a child. So I often think for younger children, what I would most want to do is equip their parents to manage any sort of emotion responses that the child might be having. So my sort of kind of go-to would be to work with the parents to make sure they feel skilled and confident in supporting that child. As the child sort of gets older, sort of entering into primary school and sort of later years of primary school and into high school, what I'm thinking there is really if we have responses that the child is having that concern us in some way, if they feel sort of flatter, more low in mood more consistently, if they're having changes to their appetite or difficulty sleeping, if they're having challenges with sort of social relationships and connecting and feeling a bit more lonely, if they're having challenges in sort of relationships with the wider family as well, or behavior changes. Those are the sorts of things that might flag this child as someone that needs a little more assistance. And so we'd be talking about school counsellors or external counsellors, talking with a GP about that sort of support. So there was a little bit of red flags in terms of the consistency of emotions that we might be concerned about, or changes to behavior, sleep, appetite, sort of the basic sort of day-to-day things that we want our child to be doing. I think we also important to recognize that often parents, so there's a book that's called, I'm going to forget the title, but it's something like Far from the Tree. talking about apples falling from the tree, that sort of saying, that actually interviewed a number of parents and their children who had different sorts of conditions, like dwarfism, schizophrenia, a range of different conditions. And what they found was the parents grieved more. The parents were more concerned about the impact of that condition than the child themselves was. The child, especially if they'd lived with that condition through much of their lives, it was part of their norm and they'd find ways to adapt to that and manage that. That it was the parents that actually carried more distress about that and the impact it might have on their child's life. So I just like to draw that distinction as well. I think certainly for parents, they feel things for their children, and sometimes our assumptions about what impact that is might not always be correct. And so it can be important to explore that in conversations with the child about how they're managing. The other
It's
part.
interesting. Sorry, Nathan, just to interrupt you there. It's interesting you say that because last year we did a health and impact, a social impact assessment
Yes.
on NF.
Yes.
And the results of that showed that the carers said that NF impacted their mental health more than the people who actually had the diagnosis themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think absolutely. The other just flag that I didn't mention about children is watch how they play. And if they're playing with toys and playing out stories as kids do, sometimes their concerns are visible within their play as well. So if they're playing out scenarios where their toy is in hospital or receiving treatment or scared or struggling with making friends, those can be the little cues that might alert us to a child that might be struggling with something as well.
And thank you, Claire has just put the link in the chat. So I'm emailing that to Ruth right
Brilliant.
now.
Love
And
it. Yep.
when she puts the recording out, she can add that as well.
Yeah.
And I think, Nathan, that comment about parents worrying even more about the feelings of their child, I think that's reflected in young adults as well. We work with young adults and quite often they'll say, oh, I don't tell my mum just worries all the time. You know, they really
Yes.
feel that intense worry, things about that they're not worried about, that they think, oh, I know mum's going to be worried about that. So they really do feel the worry of the parents. So, and I think we spoke about it earlier, just that preparing yourself to answer questions that your child might have is the best thing you can do, which is exactly what you've said.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's, like you were talking about before, being as informed as possible. I guess a child's understanding about NF is going to evolve over time and the sorts of questions they have and the sorts of information they need. That, as I think we were talking about before the presentation, about that sort of unfolding understanding, and this is a multiple conversations sort of a thing. It's not a single discussion, which is sort of all said and done, that this is something that will no doubt evolve over time as well.
And Amanda has put in the chat as well, is it okay to pretend to my child that there isn't a problem until they're old enough to deal with the gravity of the situation? I feel like it's better they don't have to deal with it other than to know that they have NF and they have to have regular checks.
This is a tricky one, and I think I'm going to suggest that every parent is going to have the best wisdom about what is right for their child. So I'm in no way going to be prescriptive or directive about the right thing to do here, because I don't think there is an absolute right or wrong. What we know more generally is trying to be as honest as possible with children to their age and stage of development is really important, of kind of helping them to know I guess, the facts about what they need to know right here and right now. We know that actually sort of revealing something to a child at an older age that has been part of their reality the whole way through is not necessarily a good thing for kind of keeping trust between a parent and a child, because the child can go, well, why didn't you tell me that before? Are there other things that you're holding back from me? So I think that sort of age and stage developmentally appropriate sort of openness can be really important. I guess I think a parent's instinct is to protect their child, but sometimes having sort of some of the facts there from an earlier stage is really important, so there are no surprises later on, and that sort of keeps the trust going within a relationship. I often talk with parents about fast forwarding, like imagining your 15-year-old child and what they will want to know and what questions they will have about what you told or chose not to tell them, and how they might feel about that as well. So I guess when we're in the here and now with our, I don't know how old your child is, but say our sort of 7-8-year-old, we might feel very protective of them. But
7, you got it right.
I was right on there. So yeah, sort of thinking about in sort of 8, 9, 10 years time, what would they say about what they wanted to know right now? I hope that makes sense. Yeah, so no, yeah, I guess it's sort of that no big reveal surprises. And we know that kids are actually often more resilient and more capable of coping with information than sometimes that we give them credit for. But you know your child the best, and you know your comfort level with conversations as well. And so that's a very individual and personal decision as well.
And we've heard that a lot, Nathan, with adults who we speak to about their childhood experiences and what they were told or what they were not told. And I think the general impression I have is that they would rather know, maybe not all the details. And as you say, you keep that appropriate to the age level. But I think the whole sort of premise of no, everything's fine. I think people have looked back and sort of in hindsight had some problems at how they were treated as young children.
Yeah. Okay.
And again, we have some resources that can help with helping you, equip you for those discussions with your child as well. And we are always here to talk through those conversations, to help guide and help inform, so that people feel able to have those conversations. So I think that's important to know. And even in our groups, when we speak to other parents, seeing what other parents do, that can be some of the most helpful information that people have is what did you tell your child, or how did you cope, or how, like that can be really powerful to hear how other people are doing it. It can help settle your own feelings on what you might want to do.
Yeah. And I think it's also the particular sorts of information. I guess the phrase here has been the gravity of the situation, which I guess can mean a number of different things. So not appropriate for this sort of setting with lots of people, but I would be thinking about that conversation of what information might be useful. And in a sort of hypothetical sense, if you were to share that with your child, how might you do that? So that sort of thinking through the language and the style of communication that you might use to be reassuring, to not scare a child, but to sort of have the sort of facts there. So I think sometimes that sort of, I guess, a kind of a practice of what that might sound like, a rehearsal of what that might be, then allows you to make a fully informed decision about those are words I feel able to speak to my child and I think would be helpful, or actually, no, this isn't the time, this isn't what I want to do. So I might take that extra step of just imagining what you might say, or working through with someone those sorts of words that other parents have used, to then sort of think about, is this right for my family or not right for my family?
And every child and every parent is different, as you said as well, but it is just equipping yourself with what you're comfortable in saying. I think that is the most important. Your child will know and feel your own discomfort or comfort. So that's important. So thank you, Nathan. Any other questions, Meredith? Anybody?
No, unless anybody wants to type something now.
I've got my contact details up on screen. If anybody has any questions that they want to send directly to me, I'm very happy to receive those. If there's something that you would like to follow up on, but not wanting to put in that sort of public chat forum, that's all right. And I know obviously with Meredith and Ruth there to talk through anything that you might have that would be questions for them as well.
Yeah, no, I think we are always here. It'll either be myself, Meredith, Terry, or Lisa. So there's 4 of us working part-time. But we're here from 9 to 5 every weekday. That's Sydney's 9 to 5 with all the time changes, please, and we're always available on email, and we'll get back to you the next business day. Though any questions, anytime. I think people often feel they can't ask questions, or it might be too difficult to ask questions, or I don't want to bother you, but we exist to be asked those questions. So really never feel that anything's too much or too little. I think that's important. That's why I'm really glad we're able to share and with you today, Nathan, and all your wisdom. I think these topics are really important to talk about, and the fact that we had so many people join up to hear from you really shows that I'm not alone in my belief that these are important. So please, and if anything today has made you feel anything you want to talk about further, then you can always contact us, or as Nathan said, reach out to him. But we're very pleased for everybody to join us today, and thank you all for your time. And we hope to hear from you all soon to talk about any of the things today, or to reach out for any of the resources, or attend any of our programs or events. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
I
you.
know I
Thank you.
personally have found it very helpful, and
Thank you, Nathan. And thank you, Celeste.
Yes.
thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.